Okay, I want you to picture this. You've just spent 3 hours reading a single research paper. 3 hours. You read every single word, you were diligent, you were focused, and at the end of it, you feel like you've retained, well, basically nothing. If that sounds familiar, you've probably asked yourself the same question a friend of mine, Chanello, asked me. What am I doing wrong? And my answer to her is the same as my answer to you. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just doing what we were all taught to do. We learn to read books from page 1 to the end. But when it comes to a scientific paper, that strategy isn't just inefficient, it's a trap. We call it the 3-hour trap for a reason. When you try to read a dense, complicated paper linearly, you just completely overload your brain. Your working memory simply can't hold on to all the details from the introduction, through the methods, all the way to the end. So you finish reading and you feel like you accomplished something, but you haven't really understood it. It's the illusion of understanding. To get out of this trap, you have to make a fundamental shift. You have to move from the student's path to the scientist's path. A student is trained to read from start to finish, focusing on absorbing content, right? Just learning the facts. But a scientist reads totally differently. They read non-linearly, and their focus isn't on the content itself, but on the decisions the authors made. This all comes down to a crucial change in your mindset. You've got to stop being a passive consumer of information and start being an active detective. Yeah, that's right, a detective. I want you to start thinking of a research paper not as a textbook chapter to be memorized, but as a crime scene. Your job is to sift through the evidence, check the facts, and see if the story the authors are telling actually holds up. And this one simple question is what changes everything. A student will read a paper and ask, what did they find? But a scientist reads that same paper and asks, do I believe this? That single word, believe, shifts you from a position of just passively accepting the information to actively interrogating it. Your goal is no longer just comprehension, it's evaluation. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that sounds intense, a lot of work, but it's actually way less work in the long run. The key is to use a system, and the system we're going to talk about is the 3-pass method. It's a structured way to break down any paper, making a really daunting task feel manageable. It's all about being strategic. So, let's start with that first pass, triage. Now, what do you think the goal is here? To understand the paper? Nope, not even close. The goal of the first pass is much more brutal, and frankly, much more efficient than that. The only question you're trying to answer in the first pass is this one. That's it. This entire pass should take you maybe 5-10 minutes max, and its entire purpose is to help you reject about 70% of the papers that come your way. You're not reading to learn just yet. You're reading to decide. So, in those 5 minutes, you just do a quick survey. You read the title and the abstract. That gives you the main claim. You scan the section headings to get the lay of the land. Then, and this is the most important part, you go straight to the figures and tables. A well-written paper tells its entire story in its data visualizations. Finally, you read the conclusion. That's all. From that alone, you'll know if you need to go any deeper. And to navigate a paper this quickly, you need to know the map. Luckily, most scientific papers follow a standard structure called IMRID. The introduction tells you why they did the study, the methods tell you how they did it, the results show you what they found, and the discussion explains so what. Knowing this map of the crime scene helps you find what you need in seconds. All right, you can probably already see how much time this is going to save you. So what happens to that 30% of papers that actually survive the triage? Well, that's when the real detective work begins. We move on to the second pass, interrogation. In this pass, the question changes. Now you're looking at the paper and asking, do I believe the evidence they're presenting? You're moving beyond their claims and their summary. You're looking at the data itself to see if you agree with their conclusions. You're not just taking their word for it anymore. And what's really interesting is that this approach is exactly how experts read. Eye-tracking studies have shown that novices spend most of their time on the introduction and discussion, the story part. But the experts, they live in the figures, tables, and methods sections. They go right to the evidence. For example, let's look at this. This is a forest plot. You see them all the time in medical research. It looks really complex, but you can ignore almost all of it and just look at that black diamond at the bottom. That's the combined result of all the studies. Now, see that vertical line in the middle? That's the line of no effect. If the diamond touches or crosses that line, the result is statistically non-significant. That's it. You just read a key piece of data like a scientist in about 10 seconds. And while you're looking at that evidence, you're also looking for red flags. You're asking yourself, is the author using emotionally charged language? Are they making these huge claims that aren't actually supported by the figures I just looked at? Does it feel like they're just cherry-picking the facts that fit their story? You're reading like a peer reviewer now, actively looking for the weaknesses. Okay, this is starting to make a lot of sense, right? First you triage, then you interrogate. So what's the third and final pass? Well, this is the deep dive. You only do this for the tiny handful of papers that are absolutely critical to your own work, the ones that are going to form the foundation of your next project. The goal here shifts again. It's no longer just about whether you believe it. It's now about application. You're trying to answer the question, how can I use this work in my own research? You need to understand it so deeply that you can build upon it, challenge it, and integrate it into your own thinking. And please, do me a favor. Throw away your highlighter. Highlighting is a passive act that tricks your brain into thinking you're learning. Instead, I want you to annotate. Write questions in the margins. Challenge their assumptions. Research actually shows that this kind of active interrogation can improve your retention by 2 to 3 times compared to just passive reading. And don't just stop with notes. For every paper that makes it this far, you need to create something from it. Let's call them your artifacts. Force yourself to extract these 3 things. First, the one-sentence summary of the research cap this paper opens up. Second, one method or technique you can steal and use in your own work. And third, one point where this paper contradicts something you previously thought was true. This turns reading into an act of creation. Ultimately, it all comes down to this. You have to stop looking at a pile of research papers as a chore to be completed. The goal of reading papers isn't to finish them, it's to think with them. And when you make